Have you ever woken up in a house full of silence, so deep you could hear the clock ticking from another room? That moment when you realize the phone hasn't rung in days. When the calendar on your refrigerator has more doctor's appointments than coffee dates. When you catch yourself talking out loud just to hear a human voice. You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? Because at some point after 60, many of us wake up to a startling reality. We've entered what might be the loneliest season of our lives. Not because we're unloved, but because life has shifted in ways nobody prepared us for. Our children have their own busy lives. Friends move away, fall ill, or pass on. Retirement removes the daily connections we took for granted. And suddenly, the person who was always needed by everyone now feels needed by no one. This loneliness after 60 isn't just uncomfortable. It can feel like a physical ache, a constant companion that follows you from room to empty room. But here's what I want you to understand today. This isn't the end of your story. It's simply a new chapter that requires a different kind of wisdom to navigate. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you 3 profound truths that have helped countless people transform this challenging time in perhaps the most peaceful, meaningful phase of their lives. These aren't quick fixes or empty platitudes. They're hard-won wisdom from those who've walked this path before you and found their way to genuine contentment. So let's begin with something you might not want to hear, but that might just set you free. I want to tell you about Margaret. At 68, she lives alone in the same 4-bedroom house where she once raised 3 children. The hallway still has height marks etched into the wall, tracking her children's growth over decades. The kitchen still has a large oak table where 7 people, including grandparents, would gather for Sunday dinners. But these days, Margaret's footsteps echo in empty rooms. "I never thought silence could be so loud," she told me one afternoon over tea. "I spent 30 years wishing for just 5 minutes of quiet. Now I have all the quiet in the world, and I'd give anything to hear the chaos again." Margaret's story isn't unique. It's a story I hear over and over in my conversations with people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond. The house empties. The phone rings less often. The holidays that once required weeks of preparation now pass with a brief call or a quick visit, where everyone seems to be checking their watches. This is a reality many of us face as we age. The world doesn't tell you that turning 60, retiring, becoming a grandparent, these milestones that sound so celebratory often arrive hand in hand with a profound sense of loneliness that nobody prepared you for. You spent a lifetime building connections, raising children, nurturing friendships, and building community through work and neighborhood ties. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, those connections begin to fray. Your children move across the country for jobs and opportunities. They build their own busy lives where you are no longer at the center. Friends retire to warmer climates or move closer to their own children. Some friends face health challenges that limit their mobility, or, harder still, they pass away. The workplace that provided daily human contact is suddenly gone. Even your spouse, the person who shared this long journey with you, may be gone, leaving you to navigate this new territory alone. "There were days," Margaret confessed, "when I realized I hadn't spoken a single word out loud except to thank the grocery store cashier. Not one word. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice in the house." This is the unspoken reality of aging in America. We celebrate independence and self-reliance so much that we create a culture where elders often find themselves profoundly alone. We don't talk about this enough. We don't prepare people for it. Instead, we show commercials of silver-haired couples walking on beaches or playing with grandchildren, as if loneliness is something that only happens to other people, the ones who somehow didn't do aging right. But here's what I want you to understand today. This loneliness isn't your failure. It isn't something you did wrong. It isn't because you weren't a good enough parent or didn't save enough for retirement or didn't plan properly. It's a nearly universal experience in our modern world, where families scatter and traditional community structures have weakened. For Margaret, the turning point came unexpectedly. One Tuesday morning, she woke up and couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. Her calendar was empty for the entire week. No appointments, no visitors expected, no plans. She lay there watching dust particles float in the sunbeam coming through her window and thought, Is this all there is now? Is this how I'll spend the next 20 years? That question, that moment of stark clarity, became the first step on her journey toward finding peace in this new phase of life. I realized I had been waiting, she said, waiting for my children to call more often, waiting for my old life to somehow return, waiting for someone else to rescue me from loneliness. And in that moment, I understood that no one was coming to rescue me. If I wanted things to change, I would have to be the one to change them. This is the first and perhaps hardest truth we must accept. No one can pull us out of age-related loneliness except ourselves. Our children, despite their love for us, cannot fill the daily void. They have their own lives to live, their own children to raise, their own careers to build, and we would not want it any other way. We raised them to be independent. After all, that was our job. I remember when my own mother told me something similar. She said, I spent 40 years being needed every minute of every day. Now no one needs me anymore. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Her identity, the role that defined her adult life, had disappeared. What she didn't yet understand was that this painful transition was actually an invitation to rediscover who she was beyond the roles of mother, wife, and career woman. It was an invitation to find a new purpose, one that came from within rather than being imposed from without. Like Margaret, like my mother, like so many of us who cross the threshold into our sixth decade and beyond, the path forward is about recreating what was lost. It's about creating something new, something that honors this stage of life rather than merely surviving it. And that brings me to Robert. At 72, Robert spent the first 3 years after retirement in what he now recognizes was a deep depression. A former high school principal, he had defined himself by his work, by being needed, respected, and central to community. When that ended, he felt adrift. His wife had passed away 2 years before his retirement. His 2 children lived on opposite coasts, and his daily routine had evaporated. I became invisible, he told me. I would go to the store and no one made eye contact. I would visit my son's family, and conversations flowed around me, but rarely included me. It was as if I had become a ghost in my own life. Robert's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. His neighbor's dog got loose one afternoon and ended up in his backyard. When he returned the dog, the neighbor, a woman in her 30s, invited him in for coffee as thanks. During their conversation, she mentioned that she ran a community garden project that needed volunteers. I almost said no, Robert admitted. I kept thinking, what I know about gardening? I'll just be in the way. But something made me say yes. Maybe it was just having nothing better to do that day. That yes changed everything for him. The community garden became his sanctuary. Unlike the forced interactions at senior centers, where everyone shared the common denominator of age, the garden brought together people of all generations united by a shared interest. Children came with their parents to learn about growing food. Young couples worked on plots to supplement their grocery budgets. Retirees like Robert offered wisdom and had the time to tend to more delicate plants. I wasn't old Robert there, he explained. I was just Robert who knows how to tell when the tomatoes need more calcium, or Robert who built that clever irrigation system. For the first time since retirement, I was valued for what I could contribute, not defined by what I could no longer do. What Robert discovered, what so many who find peace in their later years discover, is that purpose rarely arrives in grand, dramatic ways. It grows gradually through small commitments that connect us to others and remind us that we still have gifts to offer the world. The science backs this up. Research has consistently shown that a sense of purpose is one of the strongest predictors of longevity and well-being as we age. People with a clear reason to get up in the morning, whether that's volunteering, creating art, mentoring younger generations, or simply being available to a friend in need, tend to experience better physical health, sharper cognitive function, and yes, significantly less loneliness. But what about family? You might be wondering, isn't family supposed to be our purpose in our later years? This is one of the most painful adjustments many of us face. The truth is, while family connections remain precious, building your sense of purpose entirely around family, especially adult children and grandchildren, is a recipe for disappointment. Their lives have different rhythms. Their time is not always available to you. And the relationship works best when it's free from the weight of being someone else's primary reason for living. I see the struggle play out in so many families. Parents who feel abandoned because their adult children don't call or visit enough. Grandparents who feel used as convenient babysitters, but not truly included in family decisions. The resentment builds. The hurt deepens. And ironically, this tension often pushes family members further away, creating a cycle that increases isolation rather than reducing it. Margaret learned this lesson the hard way. "I used to call my daughter Alice every day," she said. "Then I'd feel hurt when she seemed rushed or distracted. One day, she finally told me that my calls were stressing her out because they came when she was trying to get her kids ready for school or prepare dinner. I was so focused on my need for connection that I couldn't see the pressure I was putting on her." After that difficult conversation, Margaret made a change. She scaled back to calling once a week at a prearranged time when Alice could give her full attention. The quality of their conversations improved dramatically. We talk less frequently now, but we actually connect when we do talk. I had to learn that more isn't always better. This brings us to the second essential truth. Quality of connection matters far more than quantity. 5 minutes of genuine sharing can nourish your spirit more than hours of superficial contact. A weekly video call where your grandchildren actually engage with you is worth more than daily brief hellos where everyone is multitasking. But creating quality connections requires a skill that many of us never had to develop when we were younger, when life naturally surrounded us with relationships. It requires intentionality, the willingness to reach out beyond comfortable boundaries and create new ties. For Robert, this meant joining the community garden despite his initial reluctance. For others, it might mean taking a class, volunteering at a library, joining a faith community, or even exploring online communities that connect people with shared interests. The hardest part was walking through the door the first time, said Eleanor, 75, who joined a painting class 3 years after her husband died. "I almost turned around and went home. I was sure I'd be the oldest person there, that everyone else would already know each other, that I'd make a fool of myself. And yes, I was the oldest. And yes, I was terrible at painting at first. But none of that mattered because for 2 hours, I was focused on something besides my loneliness." Eleanor's experience highlights another vital truth. Growing through discomfort is not something that ends when we reach our 60s. If anything, it becomes more important. The familiar routines that carried us through middle age can become prisons in our later years if we cling to them too tightly. The willingness to feel awkward, to be a beginner again, to risk rejection. These are the keys that unlock new possibilities. I think about Julia, who at 84 decided to learn to use social media because she wanted to see photos of her great-grandchildren more often. "My hands shake a little, so it's hard to use a phone sometimes," she told me. And all these terms were like a foreign language at first, but I kept at it. Now I get to see pictures almost every day, and I've reconnected with old friends I hadn't heard from in decades. One of my nursing school classmates found me online. I hadn't seen her since 1962. Julia's story reminds us that it's never too late to adapt and grow. Yes, change becomes harder as we age. Our neural pathways are more deeply etched, our habits more ingrained. But our capacity for growth never disappears entirely. And sometimes the most powerful changes come not from adding new activities to our lives, but from shifting our perspective on what we already have. Consider David, who at 70 found himself living alone after his wife of 45 years moved into a memory care facility due to advancing dementia. His daily routine now included visiting her each afternoon, though she rarely recognized him anymore. At first, each visit was agony, he confessed. I'd come home afterward and just sit in my chair, staring at nothing. The loneliness was crushing. Being with someone who doesn't know you anymore can be more isolating than being completely alone. David's transformation began when a counselor suggested he change how he viewed these visits. She told me to stop going with expectations, to stop hoping this would be the day Jean remembered me. Instead, she suggested I go simply to bring joy to Jean's present moment, whether she knew me or not. This shift in perspective, from focusing on what was lost to focusing on what could still be given, transformed not just the visits, but David's entire outlook. I started bringing music Jean had always loved. I'd show her pictures of flowers and birds. Sometimes I'd just hold her hand and tell her about the weather or what the grandkids were doing. And I noticed something remarkable. Even though she didn't know who I was, she was happier when I was there. Her face would light up when I walked in the room. By releasing his expectation that his wife should remember him, David found a new way to connect with her. And in doing so, he discovered a deeper truth. Love doesn't always need recognition to be meaningful. Some gifts are worthwhile simply in the giving. This principle applies far beyond situations as extreme as David's. So much of our loneliness in later years stems from focusing on what we've lost rather than what remains possible. We measure our current lives against our past. When the house was full of children's laughter, when our opinion at work carried weight, when our bodies were stronger and more reliable. This comparison can only lead to dissatisfaction. Learning to be present, to fully inhabit the life we have rather than longing for the life we used to have, is perhaps the most powerful antidote to age-related loneliness. But how do we cultivate this presence? For Margaret, the practice began with something simple, a daily gratitude ritual. Every morning before I get out of bed, I name 3 things I'm grateful for, she explained. They can't be big things like my health or my children. They have to be small, specific things from the previous day. The taste of the perfect peach, the cardinal that visited my bird feeder, the helpful pharmacist who took extra time to explain my new medication. This practice gradually retrained her attention. Instead of moving through her days on autopilot, she began noticing small pleasures she could add to tomorrow's gratitude list. I became a collector of tiny joys, she said with a smile. And you'd be amazed how much richer life feels when you're constantly on the lookout for things to appreciate. Robert found his way to presence through a different path, meditation. I was skeptical at first, he admitted. It seemed too new age for a practical Midwesterner like me. But my doctor recommended it for high blood pressure, so I gave it a try. What began as a health intervention became a lifeline. Those 15 minutes each morning when I sit quietly and just focus on my breath, they've changed everything. I notice when I'm spiraling into negative thoughts. I catch myself before I make that angry phone call to my son about why he hasn't visited. I'm more patient with my own limitations. Both Margaret and Robert discovered what mental health professionals have been telling us for years. Our well-being is profoundly affected by where we place our attention. We cannot always control our circumstances, but we have more influence over our focus than we realize. Now, let me share with you 3 essential lessons that Margaret, Robert, and so many others have learned on their journey to finding peace after 60. These aren't quick fixes or empty platitudes. They're hard-won wisdom that can transform the loneliest time of life into perhaps the most meaningful. First, don't expect repayment. Live for yourself. For decades, many of us define ourselves by what we gave others, to our children, our spouses, our employers, our communities. We measured our worth by our usefulness. But this season of life invites us to a profound shift, to value ourselves not for what we do for others, but simply because we are. Your worth has never depended on your productivity. It doesn't depend on how often your children call, or whether your grandchildren remember your birthday. You have inherent value that nothing can diminish. When you truly embrace this truth, the constant hunger for external validation begins to subside. Second, don't complain. Choose what brings peace to your heart. This isn't about suppressing genuine feelings or plastering on a fake smile. It's about recognizing that where we direct our attention shapes our experience. We can focus on what's been taken from us, or we can focus on what remains possible. We can dwell on disappointments, or we can actively seek and create moments of joy. Every day, we face this choice. And while it's not always easy, especially when health challenges, financial worries, or family tensions are real, the quality of our later years depends largely on our willingness to keep choosing peace over bitterness, possibility over limitation. Third, care for your health and soul. They are your true assets in old age. In youth, we often take our bodies for granted. In our later years, we discover that physical well-being is a foundation upon which everything else rests. Simple habits, regular movement, nutritious food, adequate sleep, limited alcohol, no smoking. These aren't just medical recommendations. They're essential practices that determine how fully we can participate in life. And equally important is the care of your inner life, your thoughts, emotions, and spiritual needs. Whether through prayer, meditation, time in nature, creative expression, or meaningful conversation, nurturing your spirit is not a luxury, but a necessity. In those moments when the silence of your home feels too heavy to bear, remember this. You don't need to fill every empty space with noise. You don't need your children to call every day to feel valued. You don't need to be needed in the same ways you once were. What you need, what we all need, is to recognize your inherent worth that has nothing to do with what you provide to others. The most beautiful truth I've learned from those who find peace after 60 is this. No one understands you like you do. No one can feel the depth of your loneliness or the weight of your memories. And no one can bring you the peace you seek except yourself. The journey from loneliness to contentment isn't about finding perfect relationships or constant companionship. It's about learning to be your own best friend, your own trusted companion. If today's conversation has touched something in your heart, please know you're not alone on this path. Share this video with someone who might be sitting in a quiet house right now and wondering if anyone understands. Leave a comment below about your own experience. What has helped you find peace in moments of loneliness? Thank you for watching the video until the end. See you in the next videos.